why don't you set up the inside the work area sample?
All right, let's say hello to Stephen Tanaka from EnviroQuest, which is actually a hazardous materials testing facility, isn't it?
Yes, James. We test for asbestos, lead in paint. We do indoor air quality testing as well as mold.
Now, before we get to the samples for our particular unit, maybe you can give us a little background on asbestos in general.
Asbestos was used from the early Roman days until currently in the 1970s. It was primarily used in the United States from the 40s to the 70s.
And now, as I understand, there are a variety of different types of asbestos, aren't there?
Yes, there are 7 asbestoform types, but there are 3 most common ones, which is chrysotile, andesite, and chrysotolite.
And what makes this material so dangerous?
Asbestos is basically long, thin fibers, and as the body tries to expel the fibers, they continually break into smaller and smaller pieces.
So they're inhaled, and as I understand, they're almost needle-like, aren't they?
That is correct.
They get embedded in the lung?
That is correct. You can develop asbestosis, which is scarring of the lung tissue, or mesothelioma.
Now, if this material is so dangerous, why is it that it's been used in the past?
Well, it's used in fireproofing, insulation materials, primarily for the sound dampening and the fire resistance and chemical resistance.
None of which really apply in our particular case.
Not in this concrete structure. It was used primarily here as part of the decorative material as well as sound dampening qualities.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the sample you've taken here.
Yes, we collected some of the sealing material, sent it off to the laboratory. The laboratory did some analyses to identify if there was asbestos in there.
And I assume by all the plastic we see in the back, it came back as positive?
That's correct. It came back containing 3% chrysotile asbestos.
So it's all coming down?
Yes.
Okay. All right, well, I'm going to check in with Shane from R&D. Appreciate it. Thanks. Hi, Shane.
Hey, James.
You are our abatement contractor for our project here. The first thing I got to ask you, is this something a homeowner can do themselves?
Definitely not. Federal and state regulations require that only professionals that are trained and certified do asbestos work.
Now, I notice your team's getting all set and prepared here. Maybe you can take us through this process step by step.
Well, the first thing we'd want to do is separate the work area from the outside environment. We do that by hanging polyethylene sheeting. The walls consist of 2 layers of 4 mil plastic, and the floors are covered with 2 layers of 6 mil plastic, each overlapping each other.
And then you've got some safety equipment over here.
Yes, this is what our guys will be using when they're doing the actual removal. This is a full body suit, which will cover them from head to toe. And we got here is what we call a powered air purifying respirator. This will ensure that the air they breathe is clean because it will be filtered through the filter and everything is contained in here.
Now, what are the guys doing here around the corner?
In the other room, we got EnviroQuest setting up their monitors to make sure that the room is under negative pressure, which means the pressure in here is lower than the pressure outside. Once we get the containment approved by EnviroQuest, then we can start the actual removal, which consists of a series of steps. Step 1 is where we actually wet down the material with a wetting agent. Step 2 is where we get our scrapers out and we scrape out the bulk of the material. Step 3 is when we brush any remaining material that may be left on the ceiling.
And then from there it's bagged?
Yes, from there it'll be bagged, double bagged, and sent out to the landfill.
Proper disposal. What about any remaining unseen fibers?
For that we use what is called a lockdown encapsulant. This will be sprayed throughout the entire work area, which will cause any airborne fibers to adhere to any surface.
And when did asbestos first become a health concern?
EPA started restricting its use in 1973.
So I assume before that asbestos had found its way into quite a few building materials, hadn't it?
Oh yes, for example, there's pipe insulation.
And that went under the trade names 85 Mag and Calcil?
Yes, correct. And there's also any textured paints before 1974. Old homes may contain asbestos shingles. There's also floor tile and vinyl flooring. Stucco. Stucco is made of Portland cements, which contain about 5% asbestos. And what we have here, this material is a sprayed-on ceiling, contains anywhere from 3 to 12% asbestos.
All right. How about drywall? Does drywall contain asbestos?
Drywall generally doesn't contain asbestos, although the joint compound and the drywall mud that they used before 1974 did contain asbestos.
So if a homeowner is going through and renovating an old home, knocking down walls or even sanding them, they're potentially exposing themselves to the fibers.
Oh yes, certainly.
Now, we don't necessarily want them to panic. I mean, just because they have asbestos materials in their home doesn't mean they're in imminent danger, does it?
Not necessarily. See, asbestos is put into 2 categories. We have non-friable and friable. Non-friable materials are really hard to break, so the fibers are well contained in that material, whereas for friable, you can easily break them and cause the fibers to be released into the air.
Sure, which was the real health concern. Now, you mentioned 1973 as being the date as far as when it was restricted. Does that mean all of today's building materials are asbestos-free?
No, actually there are over 3,000 products that still use asbestos today, such as the glue to hold down your floor tile, brake pads on your cars. But EPA does require you have it properly labeled.
Now, if a homeowner suspects that they may have asbestos in their home, what would you suggest doing?
The first thing I do is contact an independent testing facility, someone who's not involved with the removal process, such as EnviroQuest.
Yeah. Is it an expensive process?
Testing would probably run you somewhere from $20 to $50 per sample. And a project like this would be anywhere from $3.50 to $5 a square foot, depending on its condition.
And we didn't necessarily need to go through and have this all removed now, did we?
Well, the material was disturbed due to the ceiling fan installation, but the owner felt it would be well worth it in the long run. Just because if you have this removed, the value of the unit will go up compared to the other units in the building that still have asbestos.
Right, good point, not a bad idea. All right, we've got a break for some messages. Don't go away.
In 1920,
well, that's going to wrap it up for this week. Join us again next time when we'll start the demolition process. We'll follow that up by building a mini wall that'll separate our kitchen and living room areas. We'll also catch up with our electrician who will be discussing the electrical rough work before finally moving over to the bathroom to introduce some color. From the Little Grass Shack, I'm James Brennan. Aloha.
Aloha attire provided by Tori Richard. Music courtesy of Chord International and Honolulu Records.